102.5 Religions and Their Origins. Hello and welcome to the Cosmic Experience of One. This is an awareness expanding course that should be absorbed in order. Like a university course, this course's information builds upon itself, so you would be doing yourself a disservice if you took it in out of order. If you do not watch it in order, you might not comprehend the material, or worse, you will think you fully understood it and walk away with a skewed interpretation. Do yourself a favor and first view 101.1, 101.2, 101.3, and 101.4, which are all in one video that starts with an introduction to this course, then continue on viewing the subjects in order. The introduction to this course needs to be taken in first in order to know the nature of this awareness expanding course. Think of this course as a book where you will not understand it fully if you do not read the chapters in order, chapter 1 being the introduction that is imperative to take in first. So please click on the link in the description section under this video to view the first video. We will start at the major adaptation of the cosmic experience, where being a negative being in the service to self path was first granted to be paved and experienced. We will restate and expand upon this topic, as we have already spoken of this topic in Subject 101.5. Source took what it learned from itself in prior mental projections of creation, cosmoses, to further its exploration in your current mental projection of creation, your current cosmos. Each logos / star, being directly connected to Source but operating with free will, made adaptations / upgrades of progression to their influential area of the cosmic experience. In the beginnings of your cosmos, there was only the infinite positive past leading back to Source, and no negative beings existed. This is the state of the solar systems toward the center of the Milky Way galaxy. It was not until a logos made an adaptation that would prove to be very effective for Source's exploration of continuing to know itself. The creation of the negative paths that lead up to the middle 6th subdensity in the outer planes, and up to the end of the 5th density in the inner planes. During the early to middle 6th subdensities in the physical outer planes, these infinite negative paths all cease when they harmonize with / join the infinite positive paths leading back to Source. This occurred by the logos creating another partition in the mind complex or tree of mind to greatly empower the free will of beings. The choice of acting in unity or separately in the self-awareness of third density was born. The inroads of service to self became available alongside service to others, where the being eventually makes the choice in third density and graduates to fourth density positive or negative. In the middle to later subdensities of fourth and fifth density, negative beings are given the opportunity to switch polarities and continue their progression on the positive path. When the idea of the Garden of Eden was channeled to a positively oriented third density being, it was grossly simplified in story form, as the third density beings on Earth at that time were not advanced enough to grasp the larger viewpoint of the higher densities. The quote-unquote fall of Eden, as seen from a shallow viewpoint, was recorded as an quote-unquote evil event. Instead, it is when a logos created the negative path in its adaptation / upgrade to the cosmos and it came into existence. The Garden of Eden was not a place on Earth. Eden is the state of mind within the tree of mind where beings are always self-aware of their connection to Source as parts of Source, and so only positive polarity is practiced. Eden still exists and is the state of mind for the beings residing in the solar systems near the center of the Milky Way galaxy that were created before the negative path was established by a logos' adaptation. The inner planes beings, only being positive before the adaptation of choice was created, became split with inner planes beings choosing to play the role of negatives or staying positive in the inner planes densities of the third through fifth. This was depicted as being a quote-unquote war in the heavens by the positively oriented third density being who channeled this information. Lucifer was the top negative being in the fifth density inner planes at the beginning of the negative path. Lucifer has since switched polarities and merged back with Source. Thus, the entity known as Lucifer is no more. The top negative polarity position is a rotating position and so is commanded by a different entity at this time and space. It is the same for the positive inner planes as well as outer planes. Each position /role is rotating, as playing a role for too long would become boring for the being /player. The top positions for positive polarity is held by beings in the seventh density inner planes. From the beginning of a third density experience on a planet, third, fourth, and fifth positive and negative inner planes beings attempt to influence third density outer planes beings, such as human beings, toward the service to others path or the service to self path. Third density outer planes beings are also influenced by positive and negative fourth density outer planes beings, and are rarely influenced by positive and negative fifth density outer planes beings and positive sixth density outer planes beings. A portion of inner planes beings focus on influencing third density beings' belief systems and ways of living. Negative fourth density inner planes beings frequently order the third density outer planes beings who have contacted them to address them by titles such as Lord or Master instead of giving their names. Negative fifth density inner planes beings attempt to deceive third density outer planes beings into thinking they are quote-unquote God and therefore should be worshipped and shown complete submission with unquestionable loyalty. These negative inner planes beings show absolute authority, give commands, and offer deals for their services to third density outer planes beings. Positive inner planes beings never attempt to come across as God. When interacting with third density beings, they are merciful, show loving kindness, do not give commands but offer guidance, and do not make deals for their services but give freely in performing service to others' actions. Negative inner planes beings demand sacrifices for their services. If a third density being can show they have the inclination to potentially advance toward fourth density negative graduation by sacrificing a second density being or another third density being in order to get what they want, then inroads are given to the negative inner planes being and they will honor the set deal for as long as it suits them. Negative inner planes beings demand to be called Lord or King in the language of the third density being in communion with them. Negative inner planes beings love the smell of burning flesh and so make as part of their deals the roasting or complete burning of the sacrificial meat. At no time ever does a positive inner planes being or positive outer planes being ask to be called Lord, King, God, or ask for a sacrifice. Why would a positive being ask another being to force transition / kill on their behalf another part of Source? One should always use their discernment when communicating with a higher density being, inner or outer planes. Negative inner planes beings found inroads in the first major cycle of the third density experience on Earth with beings who either justified their actions in deals or simply did whatever was necessary for deals that would further their gain of power and control over others. Inroads by negative inner planes beings were expanded upon in the second major cycle and further expanded upon in the third major cycle. Positive inner planes beings also gained inroads throughout the cycles. Their information came across to third density beings as honoring the many aspects of God, or the many gods that have a powerful influence over the third density beings. The beings who followed their direction were never asked to make sacrifices or to perform certain tasks made in a deal or contract. During the third major cycle, when more advanced information could be offered, some positive advances were made when later 6 subdensity outer planes united groups offered pyramid structures along with the knowledge of oneness of Source. But Earthlings largely continued to practice pantheism and paganism, or whatever label was given to the honoring and worshipping of many selected quote-unquote gods, instead of honoring the way of one / Source, where it would be appropriate to honor all positive parts of Source if one is positively oriented. Worshipping and honoring are two distinct differences. To worship is to declare or display oneself as inferior and worth less than another self of Source, which is a falsity. Sometimes the word worship is used by Earthlings to show very high regard or respect to another without thinking of oneself as inferior to them, and in this case, there is no folly. To honor is to give respect to another, especially one who is currently more advanced in the ways of knowledge and wisdom in one's own density, or of a higher positive density. Since Source has projected countless parts of itself into the cosmic experience, honoring, not worshipping, more than one part of Source is understandable and gives due respect. But knowing all parts stem from one Source is the ultimate truth. Therefore, to honor, not worship, many gods or higher density aspects of Source, while recognizing that all, including oneself, are part of the one Source, is a respectful and knowledgeable stance. Many Native American tribes did precisely this. We do not mean to cover your terminology of quote-unquote honor and quote-unquote worship, as they are merely labels. What is important is the mentality and actions that are followed when labels such as these are applied. The actual words used are of no consequence. The falsity would be in not recognizing that all stems from one Source, or to worship any part of Source, as to do so would be declaring one is inferior to another part of Source. You are a part of Source, and to worship another self and place them above you is to not know that you are a part of Source and Source itself on a level of totality. To know that every part of the cosmos comes from Source and is a part of Source in oneness is the primary way of one. Before wanderers and positively oriented third density beings, who channeled information in some manner, started making positive advances on Earth after 900 BCE in regards to the realization of all stemming from one God /source, a great portion of beings on Earth performed sacrifices to negative inner planes beings, most of them unaware that they were worshipping negative beings, or that a difference between negative and positive higher density beings even existed. Due to ignorance and many serving negative inner planes beings throughout a great period of time, human beings assumed God /source was authoritative, commanding, and demanded sacrifices in order for worship, repentance, or blind obedience to be shown, and that God's commands should be obeyed unquestionably no matter what they were. In reality, Source does not want any of these things, nor does any positive higher density being, and God /source does not interact directly within the cosmos. When the deceitful action of negative inner planes beings pretending to be lords, kings, or God is believed by third density beings and sacrifices are made, the negatives are invited into one's house. This allows inroads to be made and more power given to the negatives as to what they can perform and accomplish in the third density physical outer planes due to the invitation and power bestowed upon them by the third density beings. The negatives then use this acquired power to bring hardship or destruction to those who do not continue to worship them and give sacrifices, or hardship and destruction is delivered to them regardless if the negatives see fit. Destruction may come sooner anyway if another third density being who is in opposition to them has sacrificed more to a negative inner planes being, either the same or a different negative being. There is no loyalty to agreements or deals with negative beings. Even if destruction by the negatives does not find itself coming back to the one who sacrifices for the negatives, the karmic wheel starts to spin, and hardship and or destruction for sacrificing and following the commands of negatives finds its way back to the human being in their incarnation and or possibly in their future incarnations, depending on how much harm was inflicted, unless the human being graduates to fourth density negative. In this case, they still have to balance their karma, but not until they have switched to positive polarity, which has to be done no later than the middle sixth sub-density. Examples are shown in your Greek myths. The kings and war heroes depicted in Greek history were able to perform great deeds due to worshiping and sacrificing to negative beings, yet almost all their stories end with utter hardship and or destruction. The Greeks and other civilizations at the time and older in Earth's history were not only deceived and tempted by negative fourth density outer planes beings and negative inner planes beings of densities 3rd through 5th, but also interacted with advanced third density beings who were from negatively and positively oriented societies who had taken their civilizations underground tens of thousands of years ago for protection from major geological shifts during major and minor cycles. They advanced technologically, and some spiritually, and used their advanced technology and craft to convince the surface dwellers that they were gods. These underground civilizations will be expanded upon in the next subject. Another prime example in history of human beings being deceived into thinking they were interacting with positive higher density beings, and in this case, quote-unquote God, are the books that make up the Old Testament, as well as similar books. Those depicted in these books thought they were making sacrifices and worshiping a positive being, usually what they thought was God, who, to human beings in that time period, did not need to come across as positive or negative in their minds because, quote unquote, he created all on earth and, quote unquote, the heavens. The positively oriented third density beings depicted in the Old Testament were influenced by both positive and negative higher density beings. Their honest intentions of seeking to communicate with God /source allowed positive beings to influence them, but their sacrifices, which were thought by most at the time as positive actions towards God /source, allowed inroads for negative interplanes beings to influence them, especially if they were human sacrifices. We will give an example of the dual influences recorded in the Old Testament and other books and documents that speak of the same stories and occurrences by speaking of the one known as Moshe /Moses. Moshe was a positively oriented third density being who, after mentally seeking and asking for God's assistance in freeing his tribe from their slavery and harsh treatment in Egypt, was contacted by a positive higher density being known as Yahweh, who was a local guardian at the time. This local guardian's later 6 subdensity united group was also known as Yahweh, and the entity of this group that was a local guardian at the time also simply went by the name Yahweh. When a single entity from a united group is interacting with third density, it is basically the same thing as interacting with the whole united group, as all entities in the united group may participate in the interaction through the group mind that is utilized by the united group. Typically, guardians do not directly influence third density beings after a third density experience is started and underway, but Yahweh's assisting actions of genetically altering what would become the post-Mars beings was seen by other guardians, although done with positive intentions, as infringement upon the Mars beings' free will. Therefore, the one known as Yahweh felt inclined under duty and honor to further assist the post-Mars beings in order to balance out the karmic ties from the assisted genetic alterations. A portion of the post-Mars beings are known as the Israelite tribe depicted in the Old Testament and other books of recorded history that speak of the same stories and occurrences. Yahweh contacted Moshe on Mount Sinai /Horeb, freely offering his assistance without asking for sacrifices or deals, as only negative beings demand such actions. Yahweh explained to Moshe how they would use prophecy in order to influence the Pharaoh at the time, Ramses II, to release Moshe's people from slavery and let them leave Egypt. The average lifespan of the Egyptians at the time was approximately only 42 years because they were not knowledgeable about water conditions. The Nile was allowed to flood and recede, which made the soil ripe for the breeding of diseases that made their way into the water at the Nile and other sources of water the Egyptians used, and these harmful organisms would be drank by the Egyptians. Also, insects would carry this disease to the Egyptians and contaminate their foodstuffs. Yahweh, observing the probabilities /timelines, knew that a greater than typical flooding of the Nile was about to occur, and it would bring much hardship, suffering, and death to the Egyptians. The Nile's source that ran to the Egyptians would flood more than usual and cause red algae along with its bacteria to get into the Nile and flow all the way to the Mediterranean. This caused the Nile to appear like blood, which was the first plague, and the algae's bacteria would breed more disease than a typical flooding and receding of the Nile, and consequently caused the preceding plagues that actually happened. Knowing that certain foodstuffs would contain diseases due to the flooding and receding of the Nile and the pestilence created afterwards, Yahweh advised Moshe and his people not to eat bread with leavening agents because these ingredients would be contaminated. Yahweh told Moshe these prophecies and their timing and advised him what to tell the Pharaoh before each one. Moshe reluctantly agreed as long as his brother Aaron would assist as his orator, since Moshe believed he was not the best of speakers. The depicted plagues regarding days of darkness and death of the firstborn in the Old Testament did not happen and were inserted into the story later on to make quote-unquote God sound more powerful. And so future readers would believe Ramses II had no other option but to let Moshe's people leave. The reality of the situation was that Ramses II did not let Moshe's people leave after the plagues that actually happened. So Yahweh, knowing there were no more plagues coming and that Ramses II was not going to let the Israelites leave, told Moshe to secretly flee with his people during the night, and that Ramses II and his army would pursue them at daybreak, but Yahweh would protect and provide for them on their journey to Mount Sinai. Ramses II and his military pursued them the next day after finding out they had fled during the night. But Yahweh kept the promise by protecting and nurturing the Israelites until they reached Mount Sinai. The false account of the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, is an action a positive higher density being would not do. Allowing hardship and death to occur that was already going to happen due to the great flooding and receding of the Nile was simply letting events unfold as they were intended. But creating the death of third density beings is not the way of a positive higher density being, nor is having lambs, or any second density being, sacrificed to mark door frames. Again, positive higher density beings never ask for the killing of second or third density beings for sacrificial worshiping rituals. This should not be confused with third density human beings preparing, possibly cooking, and eating second density beings, whether they are plants or animals, which is a natural part of the dietary system. We are simply speaking of ending second and third density beings' incarnations by way of sacrifice. To sacrifice is to end a being's incarnation simply to please a negative being, which is typically done by way of ritual. When Moshe and his tribe finally reached the base of Mount Sinai, the tribe became unmanageable and was skeptical and demanded miracles as proof that Yahweh existed and was powerful. Positive higher density beings do not give proof in this direct manner because it would be infringement upon free will. But negative beings infringe upon free will whenever they can, as long as there is minimal or no loss of polarity in the act. So a negative fifth density inner planes being gave them proof instead, which the tribe assumed was Yahweh's proof, and Moshe's tribe was satisfied and bowed down and worshipped the negative fifth density being they assumed was Yahweh. This created inroads for the negatives and set the stage for the confusion that was to follow. When Moshe went to the top of Mount Sinai to seek communion with Yahweh, it was the same negative fifth density inner planes being who had provided proof that Moshe communicated with instead, since the negative still had a hold on the situation due to being worshipped for the provided proof. A higher density being, positive or negative, cannot go by the name of another being in deception, or that would result in a loss of polarity. So this negative being did not say it was Yahweh, but said it was God instead, and that Moshe assumed that it was the same being he had spoken to before, who went by the name Yahweh, whom he believed was God. In deceptive cases, negatives simply do not state their name and hope the third density being they are trying to deceive assumes it is the positive being they had been previously dealing with, or quote-unquote God. If there was no previous dealing with positive beings, a negative being might still attempt to act like a positive being, a so-called angel or quote-unquote God, if they know they are dealing with positively oriented or neutral third density being. If they are dealing with a negatively oriented third density being, negatives do not need the previously mentioned level of deception and go straight to using other forms of manipulation, such as temptation, that the negatively oriented third density beings most likely welcomes because it serves their striving toward gaining more power and control over others. Fourth density negative inner planes beings, who typically interact with third density beings instead of fifth density negative inner planes beings, generally do not offer their names and prefer to be addressed by a title such as Lord or Master. Moshe assumed he was communicating with Yahweh, whom he believed was God, and made agreements in a contractual covenant /deal and submitted to commands given by the deceptive fifth density negative inner planes being, which created great inroads that would exist even after Moshe transitioned /died. This is why one should always use their discernment. The Ten Commandments was a successful attempt the negative being used to be perceived as a positive being. Positive beings do not command other beings, they lovingly offer advice and guidance freely. The Ten Commandments, which is a single scroll of papyrus and not stone tablets, were commands, not loving advice, and were given in a forceful manner. The commandments held positive advice on purpose in order to deceptively appear like the negative being was a positive being, but the advice was not anything human beings did not already know at the time, so the negative offered no new beneficial information while performing the deception. The Ten Commandments were forcefully given, and the first commandment, even though there is only one God /source, the deal had been made with Moshe, accepting that the one true God was the negative being, and that Moshe would deal with no other gods but the negative being, therefore removing possible future contact with Yahweh or any other positive higher density being unless certain actions were taken to annul the contractual covenant /deal. Since Moshe did not know he had made a deal with the negative being, he never sought such annulling actions. The negative being commanding Moshe to not serve other gods because it was a jealous god is a definite warning sign /red flag, because even a positive being in the fourth density has overcome jealousy. Human beings believe that God /source directly intervened in creation and mistakenly thought God was an authoritative being who demanded submission, worship, and sacrifices, and that all of its commands, no matter how negative they were, should be obeyed without the use of discernment because it created everything. It was God, and one never questioned God no matter what. Human beings believe this due to the countless contact with negative beings dating back to the first major cycle who said they were lords, kings, or gods. If a human being had contact with both positive and negative higher density beings, they assumed it was the same being and that this being was coming across as commanding and wrathful at certain times because they had done something wrong in the eyes of their quote-unquote God or quote-unquote God's angels, or that other human beings had done something wrong and deserved to be destroyed, and that was why quote-unquote God was now angry and wrathful. The covenant / binding agreement, which included continual sacrifices, the creation of a hierarchical structure of power with priests that mimicked the word shown on screen, mutilating rituals for all male newborns' genitals, and the creation of a religion to be followed without question and passed down and practiced through Moshe's descendants. Such commands and practices in this covenant would not be given by a positive higher density being. Regarding the mutilation of male newborns' genitals, despite what doctors are taught and regurgitate about circumcision rituals for male infants, the operation or mutilation creates only disadvantages. Like all parts of a human being's third density physical body, the foreskin is there for a reason, and it is not wise to remove it. The removal of the foreskin creates desensitization, as the layer of skin's protection is absent, so the male tends to go deep and fast-paced during sexual acts in an attempt to make up for the lost stimulation rather than using a finessing slow rhythm. Consequently, this tends to lead the male toward a tenser and more fast-paced rhythm that not only decreases pleasure for the male and female involved in the sexual act, but increases the probability of life force energy being hindered or blocked from moving up the chakra system during sexual acts. When this blockage occurs, the orange ray or yellow ray chakra is focused on instead of reaching the green ray heart chakra or higher chakras. Since focusing on the orange ray and yellow ray chakra during acts of sex is equivalent to inequality and disharmony, it polarizes toward the negative for one or both the beings involved. This topic and other sexual topics will be expanded upon and explained in a later subject about sex and sexuality. The mutilation of the male's genitals benefits the negatives and not positively oriented human beings. To be clear, this does not at all mean that circumcised males are incapable of engaging the heart chakra during sexual acts. It simply means they are at a disadvantage. The negative being, having influence over Moshe, led the tribe in circles around the desert for decades, not allowing Moshe and his tribe to reach their destination, Canaan, an action only a negative being would do. It was only until most of the tribe who had fled Egypt transitioned / died that their offspring, who would continue to teach their descendants to submit and worship the negatives who they thought was God, but who did not have direct deals with the negative fifth density inner planes beings, were allowed to reach the so-called promised land of Canaan. Moshe was ordered by the negative being to not proceed to Canaan and stay behind and separate from his tribe, which he obeyed with great sorrow. Again, this is something a positive higher density being would not do because it is not loving or merciful. Even a positively oriented third density human being would not do this to someone or a group. Typically, a fourth density negative being, inner or outer planes, would have attempted to influence a third density being, but since the one known as Yahweh, a guardian, was involved, a top player in the word shown on screen from fifth density got involved to counter another top chess piece on the board. After this fifth density negative inner planes being was successful and made major inroads for the negatives, the negative being returned to its typical fifth density role and commanded its negative fourth density inner planes beings, its underlings, to continue in its place after the heavy work was done and Yahweh's contact with Moshe and his tribe had been contractually barred. Even before the one known as Abraham, there was an intense battle over influencing these post-Mars beings when Yahweh started contacting them after they asked for assistance. Because Yahweh, a guardian, a being filled with much love and light energy, interacted with the third density experience, Yahweh's light signature alerted the negatives, who got involved in the battle of polarity because that is their role. As we stated, the light attracts the dark, and the dark attracts the light in regards to the polarity war. When one chess piece is moved on the game board, the opposing side can take its turn in moving one of their pieces. The ranking of the piece that is moved on either side depends on the ranking of the piece that is being responded to. A guardian piece is moved, so an equally high-ranking piece on the opposing side is moved to balance out the opportunity presented on the game board. On a third density experience filled with ignorance and confusion, the negatives have a higher advantage. When the battle of influences reached the one known as Abraham, a similar situation to that of Moshe played out. Due to a calling for assistance, Yahweh contacted the positively oriented third density being known as Abram at the time and offered loving guidance in the ways of one/source. Teachings Yahweh hoped would not only benefit a portion of the post-Mars beings there were karmic ties with, but also be spread to the multitude of human beings on Earth, as the way of one is for all beings because all beings are one. The negatives counteracted with the negative fifth density inner planes being contacting Abram, deceiving him into thinking it was Yahweh, and established the first major inroads when a covenant was formed that barred further contact with Yahweh, like it did with Moshe later on. This negative entity copied the direction Yahweh had initiated, but heavily twisted it, as negatives always do. The negative entity changed Abram's name into Abraham, which means father of a multitude or many nations, and told him he was special and that his people, the Hebrews, were the chosen people of God, and therefore more important in the eyes of God. And as long as Abraham and his people followed the negative's commands, who Abram thought was God, he and his tribe would be protected and looked on in favor in the eyes of God. When Moshe renewed this covenant on Mount Sinai, further inroads were made by the negatives. All beings are special and important by source, as all beings are source. Like a responsible parent, one does not have favorites among their offspring, and since all beings are a part of Source and are Source in totality, it would make no sense to have favorites within a cosmos that is in reality one being. It is impossible to select favorites when there is only one present. Also, a positive higher density being would not take it upon themselves to force the changing of a being's name, Abram to Abraham, and later his grandson from Jacob to Israel. These were not the actual names changed, as these are the English names. We reiterate the tried and true method of the negatives: deceive, manipulate, and tempt a select few into thinking they are superior than the majority and therefore have the right to rule over, kill, and control the majority. This mimics the control structure of the word shown on screen. This information may cause displeasing emotions to arise for those who follow the religions of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, especially the former two, and their religious offshoot branches, but reality offers liberation. However, as always, we do not force reality upon beings, but offer it to those who are ready to receive it and benefit from it. The Old Testament and the other books and documents that recorded similar history are filled with what human beings call red flags that are quite apparent to discerning and observant minds. We are equally loving to those who wish to continue or form their own beliefs. We realize that the human condition is so that when faced with information that would shift one's paradigm, especially information that evokes intense feelings of negativity due to jeopardizing the very foundation of self one has personally identified with, the established concept of self tends to shut down to the possibility of a change in viewpoint or belief to protect what one has chosen to identify with. In this state, open-mindedness is abandoned. All have free will, and it is essential for the cosmic experience. So no matter what one's beliefs are, even if their beliefs are vastly distorted from reality and are detrimental to the self, it is their right to have them, and they are respected and loved by positive higher density beings regardless. When the negatives commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son, as they commanded others on the earth to do, including the tribes in Canaan, it was done to test the limits of Abraham. Despite the commands given to him, Abraham's intuition and the assistance of his spirit guides caused him to not follow through with sacrificing his son. Abraham then sacrificed a ram instead in hopes that it would appease what he thought was God. It was received, but he had failed the negative's test. Abraham and his son Isaac returned to their tribe, and Abraham, who felt disappointed in himself for failing the test and not wanting his people to know about it, chose to lie and told them God stopped him after he was seen to be faithfully following the will of God, and offered a ram to be sacrificed instead, and that God did not approve of human sacrifice. Although this was a lie about what the negative being Abraham thought was God wanted, it was accurate information his spirit guides had telepathically offered to him. The negative fifth density inner planes being continued to command Abraham, but never asked him to sacrifice a human being again, because it might lead to Abraham figuring out he was not dealing with God. The message regarding human sacrifice from Abraham was received by his tribe and taught down through his descendants, who, when commanded to commit genocide by their quote-unquote God, saw fit to judge and justify the killing of the tribes in Canaan because they sacrificed human beings in the name of their false gods, who were the same negative beings commanding the Hebrews. The negatives commanding Abraham's descendants used this hatred to imprint separation and to further manipulate the Israelites into thinking they were spiritually superior to others. These same negatives continued to command the tribes in Canaan into sacrificing human beings, including their own firstborn children with some tribes. The negatives play all sides, just as an unethical arms dealer supplies arms to both sides of a conflict. They care not who wins, they only care about what benefits themselves. Positive higher density beings never ask or command a group to attack and kill another group, and especially not commit genocide. This is very much the commands of negative higher density beings. If the Israelites were defending themselves against an attack, they would not be in the wrong by killing their active attackers. But the Israelites were commanded to attack and commit genocide in a land they had no claim to and received no hostility from its occupants. Much karma was accrued by the Israelites for the highly negatively polarizing actions they performed in Canaan. The Old Testament and other books and documents that recorded similar history have been heavily altered throughout time. The Quran is the most accurate book of records pertaining to the history that is also depicted in the Old Testament. However, it does not matter much how accurate any historical record is when the majority of the information given in it has been offered by negative beings, unless one is aiming to graduate to fourth density negative. Since the name the one known as Yahweh went by was deceptively captured and twisted information was given in its name over the centuries, the being and united group known as Yahweh no longer goes by that name. The negatives play all sides, leading each of their prey as far as possible towards service to self, testing their willingness to obey commands and pushing their prey as far as they will let themselves be pushed. Many groups on Earth, some of which are known as the Mesopotamians, the tribes in Canaan and their descendants, the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, the Greeks, and the Vikings allowed themselves to be pushed far enough by the negatives to sacrifice human beings, including infants and their own firstborn. Positive higher density beings tell their names to third density beings they interact with and never say they are God. But negative fourth density inner planes beings hide their names and demand to be addressed by titles such as King, Moloch, or Lord or Master, Baal, or simply say they are God if it is a negative fifth density inner planes being. Negatives typically hide their names because it offers power over them in the bidding process. It is rare, but even a highly negatively oriented third density being may use perversions of ritual or sexual so-called magic to bid a negative higher density being. To succeed in this bidding is rare because the third density being has to mentally believe in their ability and power near perfection in the ritual that involves willpower and service to self. It is typically for this type of bidding control to occur with negative beings within the same density, competing for control over another to move up in the rankings. But it is rare for negatives in a lower density to attempt to bid negatives of a higher density, and even rarer that they succeed. It ends horrifically for the negatively oriented third density being who attempts the bidding with a negative higher density being and fails when they display the smallest amount of self-doubt. This is territory for the highly negatively oriented third density adept, and is not wise to be lightly initiated or treaded by those less skilled. Earth's history is littered with negative higher density beings calling themselves God, King/Malak, or Lord/Master/Baal of war, the harvest, fertility, etc. They demand to be worshipped and given sacrifices for their services in any area of life. Some so-called royalty sacrifice their own firstborn infant to gain favor for war, harvests, and long sailing expeditions, such as the Carthaginians are recorded in Earth's history as doing. The ancient Romans also practiced human sacrificing until making it illegal in 97 BCE, although some Romans continued to practice it behind closed doors. As positively oriented third density beings and wanderers were contacted and began to spread teachings of the way of one/source, and civilizations progressed to be less barbarous, the sacrificing of human beings became shunned upon and then made illegal. Although there were some who continued to practice human sacrifices secretly after had become illegal in their governed area. Even in Earth's present time, there are so-called royalty or elites in nations who pride themselves for being righteous and progressive to their citizens and the rest of the planet, who still sacrifice human beings clandestinely to keep and further their power and control over the majority, as they think of themselves as superior and therefore fit to rule and control the majority. Even some human beings who are not part of the so-called elite make blood deals with these negatively oriented human beings and sacrifice their firstborn infant or a provided infant in order to gain positions of power in politics, organizations, conglomerates, or fame in the arts, all of which are tempted with power and wealth. In this way, the highly negatively oriented third density beings and their underlings are mimicking their chosen negative higher density masters. Sacrificing is a powerful expression of worship, submission, obedience, and the so-called loyalty to negative higher density beings or highly negatively oriented third density beings, and also provides blackmail for the latter over human beings to ensure their continued obedience. What a human being receives in a blood deal is never worth it if they do not intend to graduate to fourth density negative, because it always comes full circle due to the wheel of karma in their current incarnation and/or future incarnations. The negatively oriented third density beings that make up a portion of the so-called royalty or elites have not been deceived into thinking they are serving quote-unquote God or positive higher density beings. They are negatively oriented human beings who are fully aware they are serving negative polarity. Some of these human beings are part of the later third subdensity highly negatively oriented beings who, using their seniority of vibration, incarnated in the present near harvest time to have more opportunities to graduate to fourth density negative. Likewise, later third subdensity higher positively oriented beings use their seniority of vibration to incarnate near harvest time to increase their opportunities to graduate to fourth density positive. In order for the positively oriented to graduate, they aid and serve the majority, which often causes them to be put into positions that challenge the negatively oriented who are trying to control the majority on Earth. The highly positively oriented third density beings and wanderers who have faced major difficulties with achieving their missions and serving the majority because human beings dwell in heavily controlled societies that have been slowly engineered, indirectly and directly, throughout the centuries by negatively oriented human beings, which has rapidly accelerated in the past decades. After the pyramid structures did not produce positive results on Earth, positive inner planes beings contacted mentally seeking, positively oriented human beings and wanderers in order to teach and help spread the knowledge and wisdom of the ways of one/source, especially from 900 BCE to 700 CE, which offered an alternative to submission, worship, and sacrifices in negative-based polytheistic religions. Due to this influx of opportunity from higher density positives, an influx of opportunity from higher density negatives balanced out the offerings given to Earthlings. The assistance was offered to negatively oriented humans who saw the positive movements as threatening to their power and influence over others, and who consequently attempted to capture and/or twist the positive movement's knowledge and wisdom to suit their desire in keeping and strengthening their power and control over the majority. During this period of time, the major movements, which were all spawned from collaborating renditions and versions of the Way of One/Source, from their disseminating origins in the positive higher densities before reaching the minds of human beings, were brought through by these beings. Zarathustra Spitama/Zoroaster, who was a positively oriented third density being, Lao Tzu, who was a positively oriented third density being, Siddhartha Gautama/Buddha, who was a positive fifth density wanderer, Yahushua/Jesus, who was a positive wanderer who graduated fourth density and chose to aid Earth before continuing on to the fifth density, Muhammad, who was a positive oriented third density being, and various positively oriented third density beings had a hand in shaping and changing the knowledge and wisdom held in Hinduism. Hinduism's roots are older than 3000 BCE, but like many other polytheistic religions at the time, it revolved around the worshipping and sacrificing of human beings to negative beings. Most sects of Hinduism in your present time are greatly, if not completely different from their roots, so they act as quite different from their beginnings that held the same religious label. It was largely influenced by the teachings of the Buddha, as well as other various positively oriented beings, and, like the aforementioned movements, holds knowledge and wisdom of the Way of One/Source. There are other movements and bodies of work, but the point is not to list them all, but to convey that positive higher density beings had a hand in bringing them through, and that their purpose and messages were all in agreement before reaching the minds of third density beings who did the receiving. All of these harmonious versions of the Way of One/Source started out as movements meant to teach the Way of One. None of the beings mentioned had a hand in structuring the body of knowledge and wisdom they brought through into the religions they are today, with many sects and offshoots, separation offered by negatives. Nor did they intend to form a structured hierarchy that went beyond a humbled and respected teacher who taught students in hopes that the students would become teachers just as knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than themselves. A teacher, who may go by any number of titles or labels, is only a valuable teacher if their intentions are to teach their students so they may have the possibility to reach awareness levels of knowledge and wisdom that the teacher possesses, no longer having to rely on the teacher for their spiritual growth. Due to the possible gap of advancement between teacher and student, it may take more than one incarnation for the student. This is similar to a parent lovingly teaching and raising a child so they may become an adult or parent one day and lead their own lives and make their own choices, and then offer the same guidance to their offspring or fellow human beings. All these movements were given a label or name because it was easier to spread and know of the movement if it had a label that third density beings could vocalize. But these different names are no more than labels that were meant to point to the same body of knowledge and wisdom that is the way of one/source. When looking at Earth's present religions, one can see many differences, many opposing ideas, and so one tends to think they did not have the same origin. Some of the reasons for these differences are the knowledge and wisdom offered to the positively oriented third density beings and wanderers was misunderstood from the moment it was received, or it was misunderstood by the first wave or any preceding wave of students who became teachers, or it was captured by an authoritative and controlling group or leader of high position and was twisted for selfish reasons. Some of these resulted in the knowledge and wisdom being drastically twisted so that the main points were lost and falsities took their place, which is why these collaborating bodies of knowledge and wisdom are currently presented differently and contradict each other. Another reason for religions being different has already been covered. Positively oriented third density beings were tricked into receiving information from a negative higher density being pretending to be a positive higher density being or God. All these harmonious bodies of knowledge and wisdom of the way of one/source teach loving kindness, compassion, forgiveness, patience, appreciation, honesty, generosity, and following the golden rule. If these teachings alone were followed, the third density experience on Earth would be harmonious and spiritually advance rapidly. We will use the story of Yahushua/Jesus/Isa as an example because it covers many of the topics we mentioned, with the focus on how all religious material came from the same source and how a spiritual movement can be captured and heavily twisted by negatively oriented third density beings, who are influenced and assisted either indirectly or directly by negative fourth density inner and outer planes beings. In doing this, we will also cover the so-called lost years of Yahushua/Jesus. In the time period of being a wanderer in third density, this being went by the name Yahushua, and in your present time is mostly known as Jesus in English due to different language translations of the books in the New Testament. After graduating from positive fourth density, and before continuing on to positive fifth density, Yahushua, who is a member of the local Confederation of Planets, chose to aid Earth by teaching the loving kindness and compassion he had mastered in the fourth density positive. After passing through the veil of forgetfulness and incarnating into the third density experience on Earth, he remembered more than most wanderers at a young age. Due to his focused seeking and striving, he advanced and began teaching at a younger age than most wanderers. Aspects of the Way of One he focused on were loving kindness, compassion, and being non-judgmental. Due to remembering more than most wanderers at a young age, and therefore being able to intuitively tap into abilities, at the age of 6, Yahushua, being mad at another child he was playing with, grabbed the child and accidentally channeled his anger through focused energy that force transitioned / killed the child. Yahushua was most distressed by what he had done and realized he had an ability that others did not seem to have. This action, although negative, galvanized Yahushua to use his abilities for good and never allow them to be used negatively again. This promise to himself he kept for his entire incarnation. If Yahushua had lived in your present time, this accidental negative act could have been kept in Earth's permanent digital records and brought up by negatively oriented human beings decades later when Yahushua was spreading the positive messages of the Way of One. His opposition would have hoped such a past action would ambiguously label him a bad human in others' minds and stop human beings from listening to his positive information. It is the same issue present politicians face on Earth. It is impossible to be perfect in any density, especially in third density, the heaviest, most intense, and most confusing density of all. Forever condemning a being for an error is to never allow a being to progress in society and in the minds of the beings in that society. Think of the knowledge and wisdom that would have been lost to Earth had this judgment and forever labeling of bad been placed on Yahushua like it is for convicts on Earth or any human being who performs one or two major negative actions in their incarnation. Why highlight and focus on one or a few moments of a human being's incarnation instead of considering all their moments? Throughout Yahushua's childhood, he studied the religious material of his people, Judaism, day and night. At the age of 12, he understood more than most rabbis, but intuitively knew he had a lot more to learn that was outside the scope of Judaism. At the age of 13, instead of getting married, as was the custom then, Yahushua, not interested in getting married and living a typical life and striving to learn more, left his home and ventured on the Silk Road trading route and headed toward India. He stopped along the way at various places where he felt he could further his education, as learning the ways and mentality of people in other lands opens one up to a wider viewpoint. He eventually made it to India, where he spent time as a student in both Hindu and Buddhist temples. There he learned, or rather relearned, of the cycle of reincarnation and karma, both of which he would later teach, and those teachings would be removed in official books by word shown on screen. Later he ventured north to Nepal, where he studied the knowledge and wisdom residing in the Buddhist ways in that land. And then later he did the same in Tibet. What Yahushua had learned in India, Nepal, and Tibet made him aware of the many flaws presented in Judaism. The body of knowledge and wisdom of the Way of One / source found in Buddhist material in Nepal and Tibet particularly expanded Yahushua's awareness. At the age of 25, after Yahushua felt he had absorbed all the knowledge and wisdom available to him through what has been called religious material and the ways and mentality of the people in those various lands, he returned to his earth parents and took up the work of his earth father, carpentry, while ruminating and integrating throughout the years all he had learned during his travels. When he felt ready, he started to teach others what he had learned. Due to adequately balancing his chakras, he was also able to tap into source energy from his indigo ray chakra through his violet ray chakra, completing the pathway from source so that source energy could work through him and heal those who had not pre-incarnate planned their afflictions. The depicted story of why Judas betrayed Yahushua in the New Testament is most accurate. Judas thought that putting Yahushua in a position where he would be condemned to death or use his abilities to fight and become the new ruler, Yahushua would choose the latter. Since Yahushua did not incarnate to fight and rule over others, he told his students / disciples to put away their swords so they would not further harm or be harmed, and he freely allowed himself to be arrested, knowing that his pre-incarnate plan of being crucified as a martyr had arrived. Before transitioning / dying on a cross, Yahushua made the statement that has been accurately recorded in the New Testament, forgiving his condemners due to their ignorance. This act balanced out Yahushua's karma for accidentally forced transitioning / killing the child when he was 6 years old, thus stopping the wheel of karma and removing the obligation of him having to reincarnate onto third density Earth to balance karma. Yahushua transitioned to an early 5th subdensity inner plane, but before he started preparing for his next incarnation in 5th density positive, he was approved by the local council to visit his students in his etheric body in order to have a congenial and beneficial farewell. Before covering how the knowledge and wisdom brought through by the wanderer Yahushua was captured and heavily twisted by negatively oriented human beings, we will cover a few misconceptions of Yahushua's messages. Information is given in a certain way to those who are at a certain level of awareness, so the information can be understood in the receiver's limited capacity, as one does not teach university courses to 3rd graders. Additionally, Yahushua had to use much finesse in reaching human beings because he had to build upon negative material in the Old Testament that was being followed by human beings at the time. In that time period, pointing out the numerous flaws in the Old Testament and attempting to teach new information would not have been effective in teaching the way of one / source. When information in the New Testament is attempted to be understood by human beings 2,000 years later, your present time, you have a greater capacity to understand more complex ideas. It is like a university student trying to learn from a 3rd grader's learning material. As one can imagine, attempting to learn in this way makes little sense. Yahushua was able to teach university courses, but since all his students and possible students 2,000 years ago were spiritual 3rd graders, he wisely offered learning material for their level, so the opportunity to grow from there was given. When Yahushua used the phrase quote-unquote kingdom of heaven, he was speaking of the positive 4th density or state of mind, depending on the focus topic. When Yahushua referenced quote-unquote hell, he was speaking of the negative 4th density or state of mind. When Yahushua said quote-unquote, the kingdom of heaven / God is within you, he was pointing toward the way of accessing a current state of mind and the inner work that is the path toward graduating to fourth density positive, as well as affirming that all are parts of Source and that Source resides in all beings. Yahushua was aware that Earth was in its last major cycle before the ending of the grand cycle and harvest time. His statement of returning at the time of harvest was taken with confusion. He meant his current level of consciousness, the fourth density of universal love and understanding, since he had not proceeded to fifth density yet, would return to Earth as the planet and the beings inhabiting it would begin to transition fully into the fourth density positive. When Yahushua said positively oriented humans would do the same works he has done and even greater things, he meant those who believed his teachings and did the inner work and service to others acts to graduate to fourth density positive would be able to do greater things than him in the fourth density positive. Yahushua was a wanderer, and like all wanderers, he could not fully access his true density's abilities and had to work within the game board rules of third density experience. So those in the fourth density are able to access more abilities and do greater things. To be prepared for the harvest, beings choosing the positive path need to have done the inner work and practiced an adequate amount of service to others acts to graduate to fourth density positive. If it is not a being's time to graduate at harvest, that is fine, as there are no judgments. A being has eternity to progress as fast or as slowly as they please, and all merge back with Source eventually, no matter what path is chosen, short or long, positive or negative. Yahushua's messages may have been partially misunderstood by his students, but it was not until the 4th century CE that his teachings were captured by negatively oriented human beings and twisted so much that the very fundamental messages brought through by Yahushua were altered. For political gain, power and control, and to ensure stability in the Roman Empire, in 325 CE, the one known as Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, where Sol Invictus, Invincible Sun, Mithraism, and the Christian movement were merged into one religion. Despite falsities conveyed in your current time, Constantine did not convert to Christianity and stayed a believer in the pagan religion / cult of Sol Invictus till his transition / death. At the head of this new universal religion, Catholic means universal, Emperor Constantine would indirectly reign, making him the leader of state and religion. In the Council of Nicaea and years after it, the teachings brought through by Yahushua were altered so greatly that they taught the opposite of many essential messages conveyed by Yahushua. At that time there was no New Testament, only books and documents that taught the body of knowledge and wisdom Yahushua had brought through. After the major alterations to the Christian movement took place and were recorded and written down as official books that would become the New Testament, Constantine ordered bishops to head the mission of declaring the possession of all Christian movement books, documents, artifacts, and anything that would contradict their newly forged Christian religion as heretical, and those hiding and safekeeping such would receive the death penalty. Heresy means choice, and to make a choice that was different from those in established religious positions was to be put to death / forced transitioned. Any being that declares something as heresy or another being as a heretic, which is denying another the ability of making their own choices and practicing free will, is a negatively oriented third density being practicing service to self, or a neutrally oriented being confused due to social conditioning. The body of knowledge and wisdom Yahushua brought through that did not suit Constantine and his collaborators was burned. Even the books that were kept that later became the official New Testament books were heavily edited to suit the direction agreed upon at the Council of Nicaea. Many who aligned with the Christian movement were very much opposed to these actions and saw it as an end to their movement. Earth's history does not speak of this and only conveys these actions initiated by Constantine as being quote-unquote service to others and quote-unquote patronage to Christianity, the reality being quite the opposite. Since the Roman Empire's official books were printed and reprinted and handed down throughout time as sacred and holy, and their opposition was silenced and destroyed, those following quote-unquote Christianity today know nothing or little of this opposition and the heavy editing and altering of the New Testament books. The saying, "History is written by the victors," is most accurate. In these alterations, Yahushua was changed from a mortal teacher or prophet or spark of source to being the only Son of God and part of God in the Trinity, so that his position would align with the Old Testament information and pagan religions where so-called gods or God was worshipped, shown submission, was wrathful, and never questioned. All references of reincarnation that Yahushua taught after having learned about it in the body of knowledge and wisdom brought through by the fifth density wanderer who is known as Buddha were removed from the books that would become the New Testament. The idea of heaven and hell being places that a being resided in for eternity after they were judged by quote-unquote God after only one incarnation was continued because it imprinted fear and allowed greater control over the majority. The circumstance of permanently relying on and submitting to the institution called the Catholic Church and its hierarchy of priests was also created for power and control over the majority. All are one /source, and no positive wanderer would state that they were God or God's only Son, nor would they create a static spiritual hierarchy where those at the bottom would stay at the bottom. The word shown on screen was later established in Rome to bestow more power and authority over the created religion and its followers, and to serve as a headquarters with more funding and resources to continue and expand the efforts of deeming what was heresy and the finding and capturing of information that was opposed to their created religion, which included not only written information but any artifacts or objects that had the potential to expand humanity's awareness, because material in this nature would consequently differ from their created religion, and therefore pose a threat to their ongoing power and control. Important knowledge and scrolls were stolen from the Library of Alexandria and moved and hidden. Word shown on screen, library. All records of Yahushua traveling and learning the knowledge and wisdom Buddha brought through was collected and destroyed or hidden in word shown on screen, which is why there are the so-called lost years of Jesus /Yahushua. In order for Rome's created religion to exert power and control, the collaborators thought it was necessary to make Jesus Yahushua God, and one who did not learn anything from others on earth, since an all-knowing God would not need to learn anything, especially from another religion's knowledge that differed from Rome's created religion. With Jesus Yahushua being God in their new religion, they could continue the practices of the religions or ways of old that have their followers submit, worship, and follow commands without questioning them and without thinking for themselves. Selected books and documents of the Christian movement were burned, and the remaining were heavily altered to make up the New Testament so they could be combined without clashing with the information in the negative material in the Old Testament. Be aware that there were and are many positively oriented third density beings within the Catholic Church institution and other captured religious institutions who are attempting service to others' actions and are not aware of the true nature of their institutions. In your present time, there are secret organizations and teams created by negatively oriented human factions that mimic word shown on screen actions and operate internationally to clandestinely remove discovered artifacts, written information, crashed spacecraft from other planets, advanced technology from past beings, free energy devices that have been invented, and more. These service to self actions, put in motion by negatively oriented human beings, are meant to keep the majority from expanding their awareness, because doing such makes the majority far easier to manipulate and control. The symbols expressing the Christian movement were a lamb, a fish, and a shepherd. The lamb was initially used as the symbol for Rome's created universal religion. In the 7th century CE, word shown on screen changed the lamb symbol with Jesus /Yahushua being killed /sacrificed /forced transitioned on a cross as a secret insult. To add further insult to the capturing and twisting of the knowledge and wisdom Yahushua brought through, the word shown on screen, which at its core worships and takes commands from negative beings, gloated behind the scenes as the followers of their created religion kneeled, submitted, and worshipped before Yahushua being sacrificed on a Roman cross. Like human beings are sacrificed in negative religions and rituals, Yahushua did not die on a cross to absolve earthlings' sins /karma, as Rome's created religion states. This would be major infringement upon free will. Only the being who has started the wheel of karma can stop the wheel of karma. One may have assistance, but it is oneself who has to balance out their karma. Another being balancing out another's karma may sound like aid from a shallow viewpoint, but from a larger viewpoint, it is the opposite of aid. When word shown on screen captured and twisted the information that Yahushua brought through, word shown on screen kept the Old Testament's information and validity from fading and added their twisted version of Jesus' information to it in an attempt to keep the negatives in control. This was accomplished by adding Jesus to the position of God by way of the quote-unquote Holy Trinity, so that quote-unquote God could continue to be the authoritative and wrathful entity depicted in the Old Testament, which, as we have stated, was actually a negative fifth density inner planes being and not God. And so the people would continue to follow the negatively oriented information in the Old Testament. In doing this, word shown on screen, also able to keep their followers feeling insignificant and unworthy in the eyes of quote-unquote God, which hindered their possibilities of graduating to fourth density positive. Although the followers of this created religion were still taught to be kind and generous to their fellow human beings, one could get to so-called heaven by simply believing Jesus was their quote-unquote Lord and Savior and that he died on the cross for mankind's sins. And so one might not be truly motivated to perform service to others' actions when they already have an easy ticket to so-called heaven. All religions may offer progression through a portion of the beliefs they teach, but the religions based on a God who is separate from you and have a forever heaven and hell concept need to be abandoned at some point in order for further progression of a being to take place. The symbol known as the cross was a sacred symbol long before Yahushua/Jesus incarnated as a wanderer on earth. The horizontal line crosses the represented chakra's vertical line at the indigo ray chakra, which is affiliated with the point in sixth density where the dualism of polarity ends and only the positive path remains. This symbol draws attention and focus to one's higher self and all beings' higher selves and united groups that reside at this point mentioned in sixth density and can be used as a talisman or as a reminder. Similarly, the upside down cross draws attention and focus on negatives who utilize the orange ray and yellow ray chakras, represented where the low horizontal line crosses the chakra's vertical line, to display the negative's intentions and do their bidding. A similar symbol known as the Celtic cross or the sun cross or sun wheel that zooms in to focus on the part that represents the same reality while adding emphasis on the sixth density crossing point of the vertical and horizontal lines where the circle represents all that is associated with this point in sixth density after the positive and negative paths have harmonized and all dualism has ended. The circle represents the logos, where later six subdensity united groups at some point inhabit a logos/star after the point in sixth density of unity where the two paths have been crossed. All these symbols may act as talismans and reminders of unity and wholeness and have nothing to do with any religion. The actions of the words shown on screen speak louder than their words, and their deeds paint a clear picture of their institutions' intentions. The several crusades, words shown on screen, launched from the 11th to the 13th century CE that forced transitioned/killed more than 8 million human beings is no different than the accounts of historically shunned tyrannical leaders and governments who forced transitioned/killed millions. In your present time, the Crusaders would be seen as no different than hired mercenaries. There was nothing holy about these wars/crusades. Words shown on screen not only took a public neutral stance during World War II, but swindled money from Jewish families for insurance policies that words shown on screen intention of honoring. Many words shown on screen who follow the fourth density negative's commands. Despite monotheistic movements being captured and twisted into controlled religions, it was a step forward from the majority-followed polytheistic religions that practiced animal and human sacrificing. Organizations, secret societies, and cults like the word shown on screen continue their old religious ways of sacrificing animals and humans, but they have to do so secretly because the majority no longer agrees with sacrificing life forms, other than a few sects of religions that still openly practice animal sacrifices on notable days in their religions. The knowledge and wisdom brought through by positively oriented third density beings and wanderers that convey the way of one/source from 900 BCE to 700 CE were all in harmony from their inceptions. The differences between teachings and current religions show that the original knowledge and wisdom bestowed during this period of time has been greatly twisted, either unintentionally or intentionally. Positive beings and united groups in the 4th, 5th, and 6th densities focus on bringing knowledge and wisdom forward that they are well versed and familiar with, focusing on the teachings learned in their density and below, as a wise teacher does not attempt to teach what they are not well versed in. Channeled information, which is brought through in different ways, from positive 4th density beings and united groups, focuses on loving kindness, compassion, being non-judgmental, and the importance of meditation. Channeled information from positive 5th density beings and united groups focus on wisdom and higher forms of knowledge in addition to what positive 4th density beings teach. Channeled information from positive 6th density beings and united groups, which comes through much more rarely to 3rd density experience than from positive 4th and 5th density beings, focuses on knowledge and wisdom learned in the 4th and 5th densities, as well as that from an expansive viewpoint of unity in the cosmos where the dualism of polarity ends and paradoxes are resolved somewhere in the early to middle 6 subdensities. Since the later 6 subdensity united groups reside in the highest subdensity of all densities that interact and influence 3rd density beings, as 7th density beings and Source do not, they can offer 3rd density beings the most accurate and expansive viewpoint available, a viewpoint that understands unity and is past the dualism of positive and negative polarity. This is precisely why the large scope of information is able to be offered in this awareness expanding course, since it is brought through by a wanderer with the aid of his later 6th subdensity united group, where only positive beings in unity reside. We restate, if a human being looked at all the religions practiced on Earth in the present time, they may find it hard to believe that the original knowledge and wisdom for all of them was in agreement and came from the same origin. The root reasons for the way of one/source coming through to the 3rd density differently, although in agreement, and possibly being misunderstood, are as follows. The positive higher density being or united group offering the knowledge and wisdom to the positively oriented 3rd density being, whether they are a wanderer or not, focuses on what they are well versed in for their particular density, as we have recently covered. This offers information to possibly appear differently in the 3rd density being's mind if they misunderstand even a small aspect of the information. Another root factor is that positive higher density beings and united groups have come to different ideas as to how information should be presented to the particular 3rd density civilizations on Earth, realizing that the different ways of living and mindsets of civilizations have different ways of learning, as the students in a classroom have different ways of best learning a subject. This creates the possibility of information offered to one civilization on Earth to possibly appear different in another. Another root factor is that human beings are only offered information that is in their capacity to be understood. A civilization in a first grader status is not offered sixth grader knowledge and wisdom. And when different grade levels are offered information on the same topic, the lower grade level beings and civilizations are presented with simplistic stories and scenarios that often appear to oppose information presented to higher grade level beings and civilizations. The grade level of Earth's current civilizations, although there are still differences in grade levels from one civilization or nation to another, is connected enough through the internet and mediums of entertainment and learning, and is of a high enough degree that this awareness expanding course may be offered. It would not have been offered in full before the 1960s CE because civilizations were not advanced enough to absorb such awareness. Earthlings express their grade level in the advancement of science and the topics human beings find of interest. Concepts like infinite timelines are popular in your mediums of entertainment and are sometimes portrayed fairly accurately. Infinite possibilities /timelines and a multitude of other fairly advanced material was not offered from 900 BCE to 700 CE, when knowledge and wisdom was given to the positively oriented third density beings and wanderers whose information can be found distorted in Earthlings' present religions because the vast majority were not advanced enough to comprehend it. As one can see on Earth, an advanced concept is taught much differently to a first to third grader than to a university student. A simplistic story constructed for a first to third grader about a topic is most likely seen as quite false to a university student who is given more advanced and comprehensive information on the same topic. The Garden of Eden story depicted in the Old Testament and other religious books is an example of a simplistic story given to a spiritual first grader because that was the capacity level of human beings at the time. Whereas the same story presented in this awareness expanding course at the beginning of this subject is substantially different because it is able to be much more accurately presented because human beings today are able to grasp higher concepts. So one could imagine the futility of advanced human beings in the present time trying to learn from material in the New Testament and other similar books presented in a spiritual third grader manner approximately 2,000 years ago to human beings with the mental advancement they possessed at the time. Current Earthlings are more advanced and can understand ideas and concepts that would appear incomprehensible to Earthlings 2,000 years ago. It is not intelligent for a university student who has become interested in a topic to go to a third grade class to learn it. Doing such is unwise and offers more distortions than it does spiritual advancement. The exception would be the wisdom offered around 2,000 years ago, or at any time, as wisdom can stand the test of time if it is preserved, although it is sparsely offered in your so-called holy books that are drowned in an ocean of distortions. The most notable wisdom presented in your past is the wisdom that the one known as Buddha offered because this being was a fifth density wanderer, and fifth density is the density of wisdom and light. Compounded with his simplistic deliveries that often come through incorrectly, cryptic language is used that offers a myriad of different interpretations, and distortions abound in so-called holy material that contradict the way of one /source. We will cover some examples in the book of Revelations, which depicts the coming micronova and harvest time. Revelations 3:15 through 16. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spit you out of my mouth. We do not see any of the interpretations given by religious organizations to be accurate for these passages, as with most passages. Firstly, Source/God would not spit any being out of its mouth, as such an action is done out of hatred and judgment, which is not the way of Source, and since the collection of all beings is Source, it would be equivalent to Source spitting itself out of its mouth. These passages mean that if a being has not done adequate negative or positive works, cold nor hot, and remains neutral, lukewarm, at the end of the grand cycle on Earth during harvest time, they will not graduate to fourth density positive or negative yet, and will continue their third density experience on a different third density planet. They will continue in this manner till they are ready to graduate to fourth density. Revelations 7:4-8 is a complete distortion that lists, quote-unquote, the tribes of the children of Israel to be, quote-unquote, the servants of our God. We have already covered who they were actually serving unbeknownst to them. This information is a throwback to Old Testament information and puts great emphasis on God playing favorites, which is far from the way of Source, as all beings are a part of Source and are equal in the mind of Source and are Source in their totality. In Revelations, the Book of Life, also known as the Akashic Records, is mentioned multiple times in a false light regarding judgment and being erased from the book. As we have stated, Source does not judge. Even positive beings from the fourth density do not judge. Judging is done by third density beings and negative higher density beings. Furthermore, all beings, both positive and temporarily negative, do not need to be listed in the Book of Life to inherit eternal life, as all beings, as parts of Source, already are eternal. And whether a being does positive or negative deeds in third density does not exclude or erase them from the Book of Life, because all beings are recorded in the Book of Life regardless of their actions. Each specific being's section in the Book of Life has been called their little scroll or little book. In Revelations, a mighty angel has John's little book and asks him to eat it. A more accurate translation from the original scroll is, quote-unquote, study and digest it, rather than, quote-unquote, eat it. When the little book is studied and digested, it may taste both bitter and sweet, as are the positive and negative actions one performed in their incarnations. When all one's third density incarnations in the little book are studied, it may taste bitter in one's stomach while being digested, but the growth and way forward it provides is sweet. All beings past the early third subdensities study and digest their little book between incarnations in the inner planes as they learn of past incarnations and prepare for their next incarnation. Most bodies of knowledge and wisdom offered around 2,000 years ago were meant to prepare a third density being to focus on the next step alone, graduating to fourth density, which was suitable for the time. In the present time, we believe that offering an accurate summary of the steps ahead of the next step offers not only a quicker advancement to the next step, but a more confident ascension on the staircase, given that more motivation to take the next step is seen when the purpose of the whole staircase is understood, at least in summary. We are not necessarily trying to discourage human beings from utilizing channeled material from their history. We are simply conveying the reality of the situation. Although the reality of any given situation is up to each being to discern for themselves, as always. So we offer this awareness expanding course without force and respect the free will of all beings who may disagree with it. All is as it should be. As for methods of mastering mental thoughts and emotions, which leads to balancing the lower chakras so one can focus more on the heart chakra that equates to graduating to positive fourth density, which is what this course's 103 material will cover, there is considerable modern material that can be found on the internet and in books that the channel material in the past barely covered or not at all, with the body of works brought through by Buddha and Lao Tzu being notable exceptions. There is a wealth of other notable ancient material, but it is not available to the public because negatively oriented third density beings have hidden it from the majority. The availability of much modern knowledgeable material should be no surprise, as there are approximately 385 million wanderers incarnate now on Earth, and the seniority of vibration has granted hundreds of millions of later third subdensity positive beings to incarnate as the harvest time approaches. Third density beings use discernment by way of analytical thinking and intuition to practice the free will given to them and make choices for themselves. To mindlessly follow is a second density being's trait. Third density beings are self-aware and are responsible for their thought creations and actions. Thinking for oneself instead of mindlessly following others is one of the lessons that must be learned and practiced in order to graduate to fourth density. Make choices for yourself instead of giving your choices away to so-called official sources, experts in their fields, authoritative governments and organizations, or the rest of the majority, which tend to follow aforementioned sources by way of programming and social conditioning. Analyze all available data and evidence and make your own choices and decisions. It would benefit one to use their own mind instead of being controlled as a tool by programming and the social conditioning that is shaped by it in its many forms. Just because religions, science, governments, organizations, or the rest of majority say something is ethical or not, true or false, or what is the most effective way to do something, does not mean it is. When one uses their free will efficiently, everything is questioned and nothing is blindly followed. Earth's history shows countless examples of human beings being mocked or condemned to death for bringing through information that was later deemed accurate by so-called official sources and the majority who tend to believe such sources. One would suspect Earthlings to have learned this lesson by now, given it has been offered to them countless times, but we see the same situation continuing on Earth, which is largely due to the negatively oriented being's programming and the social conditioning it shapes. History and lessons learned in it on Earth seem to be carelessly discarded in favor of transient trends and information that are more short-lived and abandoned as time passes and attention spans diminish. Human beings like to follow the majority way of thinking so they will fit in, be accepted, be liked, be given opportunities in the system, be given positions they desire in their society. Thus, to shape and control the majority, negatively oriented human beings use programming methods to shape social conditioning so the majority that humans tend to follow believes what they want them to believe, and act how they want them to act. This programming and social conditioning also uses the controlled majority as tools to work for the negatively oriented human beings at targeting free-thinking humans they want to be mocked, ignored, or silenced, so their control structure is not threatened. The negative control structure always has underlings doing all the chores for them. Fifth density negative beings are at the top of this control structure, and negatively oriented third density beings are at the bottom of this control structure, or rather, the third density beings of the majority that the negatively oriented humans use as tools with social conditioning are at the bottom. The reality of reincarnation would surface quite easily if the wealth of evidence that supports it was looked into and analyzed properly. The gaping holes in religions that support the existence of a heaven and hell, or science that supports non-existence after death, would become apparent. Are you going to use your mind and free will to look at the evidence that the programming and social conditioning is telling you not to believe and to not even look at and consider? Or are you going to consider ideas and events that have supporting evidence? Part of being self-aware is observing the programming. If the programming and social conditioning it shapes is directing human beings to think in a certain way or believe a certain thing in a forceful manner, often utilizing aggression and hate, and dictates or insinuates that you do not have a choice in the matter, or expresses the majority will hate you if you do not conform and comply, this should be what human beings call a red flag, an indicator that something is wrong. With the immeasurable wealth they have accumulated, highly negatively oriented human beings clandestinely took over a large portion of the programming facets of the planet that help shape social conditioning on the planet. The news in its many forms, politics, religious organizations, international organizations, international conglomerates, the arts, especially movies, TV shows, books, and music, internet websites that tout facts and ridicule important true information, and internet platforms and websites that censor, ban, and shadow ban important information human beings share, especially via books and videos. The most widely used online websites / companies where one can purchase books and share videos are both heavily controlled by negatively oriented beings, because these are the two most effective ways for human beings to inform other human beings about important topics. All these facets and more have been utilized by the negatively oriented human beings to use programming to shape social conditioning in an attempt to engineer a majority that is self-defeating and that works against the positively oriented human beings who are trying to aid and serve the majority. Most of the majority, but becoming less every day, do not believe human beings could act in such a way that they would define as quote-unquote pure evil. So they dismiss and ridicule the other members of their majority who raise the alarm, which is also due to programming. One who is willing to sacrifice their firstborn infant tends to not think twice about performing an quote-unquote evil act against another human being or all of humanity. Most of the majority are aware there is mass corruption for the sake of gaining or increasing wealth, but they do not believe a being's mentality and intentions go further than utilizing the monetary system to gain wealth. The negatively oriented human beings are fine with the majority believing corruption goes as far as being financial, and use all their power to program and socially condition the majority into not believing anything further about service to self mentality and the actions that spring from it that the majority would consider being quote unquote evil. When we reiterate topics like this, it is because they are important and because repetition is useful in breaking the negative's programming. Discernment should be used in one's own density as well as when communicating with higher density beings. Highly negatively oriented human beings know the power of social conditioning and so have taken control of a large portion of the facets of society that play major roles in shaping what social conditioning dictates. Thus, they decide the programming that shapes social conditioning. In utilizing these different facets, negatively oriented human beings can make the smallest minority appear to be the majority that a portion of the actual majority tends to follow. This programming has proven to be a powerful weapon for the negatively oriented human beings, as it utilizes those who mindlessly follow the programming and social conditioning to ridicule, shame, judge, vandalize, and even force transition / kill others who do not follow the programming. We thought human beings would have learned from the many examples of this happening in their history where it was shown and accepted by the majority to be a mistake in the aftermath, with the Nazis' control and influence being a major example in Earth's recent history. But it seems a large portion of Earthlings have still not learned this lesson, as it has picked up pace again recently with brash programming by the negatively oriented. You are no longer a second density animal that mindlessly follows the pack. When you become old enough as an adult, you have adult responsibilities and need to think for yourself and make your own choices. If you are letting programming, social conditioning, a fake or real majority, religions, science, authority figures, or a government treat you like a child and make your choices for you, you are ignoring the mantle of responsibility that is given to self-aware third density beings. One cannot ignore this responsibility and be ready to graduate to fourth density. This is one of the reasons why the majority of human beings who have experienced the third density on Earth will not be ready to graduate to fourth density come harvest time and incarnate on a different planet outside the solar system to continue their third density learning, which from a higher viewpoint, as we have stated, is perfectly fine. All is as it should be. For those who follow religions that are built upon the same or similar information found in the Old Testament, Quran, and the New Testament, we offer this message. One may more appropriately honor the positively oriented third density beings and positive higher density beings known as Yahweh, who no longer goes by this name, Jesus, Muhammad, and others by following their actual teachings, which are the same as all positive higher density beings' teachings, instead of following religions created in their names by negatively oriented third density beings and trickster negative higher density beings posing as God. You would not be turning your back on them by leaving a man-made religion they did not create. Rather, you would be turning toward them. Even if one does continue to follow man-made religions that speak of a God that is wrathful and separate from you, and that involves an everlasting place such as heaven and hell, the positive higher density beings who have been deceptively affiliated with these religions by human beings, as well as all positive higher density beings, will continue to assist you regardless, because you are a part of Source and all is one. By assisting you, they are also assisting themselves. Their aid is of loving kindness, compassion, and unity instead of judgment, violence, and hate. You may, as the wanderer from our united group has, develop a more personal and powerful relationship with positive higher density beings, those whose teachings were twisted into religions and all others. When you interact with them in a manner that is respectful to them as well as yourself, a manner that does not include sacrifice, submission, prostration, worship, blind obedience, and making them a quote-unquote God. In relaying this information about religions, we are not only assisting you, but assisting those positive higher density beings and united groups whose information has been captured and twisted. Atrocities have been committed and continue to be committed in their names that continue to accrue karmic ties for them to some degree. Because when a positive higher density being directly aids third density beings, they agree to take on a level of responsibility of what transpires from the result of their intervening. Even if no karmic faults were made on their end while they were visiting or incarnate in third density, the end result of what transpires due to their involvement still weighs on their karmic ties. When a positive higher density being decides to directly interact by attempting to aid third density beings, they sign up for a karma agreement that possibly does not cease until the grand cycle of that particular third density planet's experience comes to a close. Our later 6 subdensity united group has made this agreement as well and has karmic ties to human beings, and so we will continue to aid Earthlings in the manner we and the Council see as appropriate till the closing of the grand cycle and the ending of the harvest time. Thus, our united group offers this awareness expanding course to all human beings. What has been called Eastern knowledge and wisdom, that some call religions, are the most accurate at portraying reality, with the body of knowledge and wisdom Buddha brought through being the most comprehensive. As such, it is more appropriate to call them ways of life and not religions, just as the misnomer God would be better to avoid, the misnomer religion would be better to avoid as well for Buddhism and some other Eastern bodies of knowledge and wisdom. Although any labeling other than the way of one or the law of one is not necessary and may lead to confusion and separation. The way of one is not a religion or esoteric information. It is simply as it is stated, the way of one, or the way in which source and source's mental projections operate in the cosmos. Eastern bodies of knowledge and wisdom have also seen their share of tampering, although not as heavily as those in the areas that are called the West and Middle East. There has also been the official banning of quote-unquote heretical information from Eastern bodies of knowledge and wisdom. The positively oriented third density being known as Lao Tzu brought through the information contained in the Tao Te Ching that is still revered by human beings today. But this oral teachings that contains further powerful information for advancing along the path toward merging back with Source, or the river that flows back to the Tao /Source, were banned, and written copies of it were burned during a period of discord in China. The same situation that occurred in Rome regarding the Christian movement happened in China regarding the knowledge and wisdom brought through by Lao Tzu. Fortunately, those that revered Lao Tzu's teachings kept it alive by passing it down orally through the centuries from teacher to student, and it is available today as the Huahujing. The authorities who run the establishment that calls itself the Taoist religion does not recognize these oral teachings by Lao Tzu as being legitimate, just as words shown on screen found all the powerful books regarding the Christian movement that they did not include in the New Testament as being illegitimate. If information is seen as being too powerful by negatively oriented human beings who see it as a threat to their self-serving power and control, they use their influence to discredit and erase such information. In the past, it was done by banning and burning. In Earth's present time, as to not draw attention to information in a book that would result in free marketing for the information if it was banned, negatively oriented human beings do not ban powerful books. They do what has been called shadow ban books. Since most books are purchased on internet platforms in your present time, digital trickery and manipulation is used to such an extent that very few human beings become aware of these shadow ban books. Since the major internet platforms that sell books are controlled by these same negatively oriented human beings, this shadow banning method is done quite easily and is very effective. In the Huahu Jing, Lao Tzu states, "The teachings are simple. If you try to make a religion or science of them, they will elude you." This statement and many other powerful statements in this body of information is why the negatives wished to erase the oral teachings Lao Tzu brought through. The Tao Te Ching was not targeted by the negatives because, although it also contains powerful wisdom, its teachings are more ambiguous and allow for many distorted interpretations. In some ways, science has become a religion as well. When dogma is strictly followed without open-mindedness and scientific results that are in opposition with the beliefs of the scientific community are ignored, stagnation occurs. As with each religion, science has a body of knowledge and wisdom that it tends to strictly adhere to. Scientists who present new ideas that are reality-based are often mocked or labeled as pseudoscientists, and their work is what has been called debunked. Their honorable label of being a scientist is stripped, while scientists who adhere to the dogmatic body of knowledge and wisdom they are told to are accredited and honored. It should be no surprise that science is heavily controlled by the negatively oriented human beings. If they did not suppress, mock, and quote-unquote debunk information breakthroughs in science, it would ultimately lead to their loss of power and control, as an informed population is a threatening population in their minds. Science and spirituality have been pitted against each other and taught to be two separate opposing things or beliefs. As with the nature and nurture debate, as well as so many other dualistic debates, spirituality and science are aspects of the same way or function. Actual science supports spirituality, and actual spirituality supports science. Science explains the mechanisms and the ways of operation in which spirituality functions, and vice versa. When the body of science understands how the cosmos is composed of vibrating love and light energy that emanate frequencies that form structures of geometry that adhere to mathematics throughout the cosmos, spirituality can be further understood and explained in a technical manner. Unlike the fourth density, the third density experience is practiced without united groups, so there will always be a vast difference of opinions and choices. Allowing these differences of opinions and choices, as long as they do not harm other human beings, and respecting each other's free will is the positive way forward in third density. Knowing there will be human beings who choose to stay in religions, we advise showing them tolerance, patience, and loving kindness, as well as respecting their free will. No matter how beneficial and important something is, nothing should be forced, as using force is infringement upon free will. Advising the path away from religions and other impediments may be brought up at opportune times to aid others, and done in a loving manner without force or judgment would be appropriate. Not all are ready for the next step forward on the staircase, and it is appropriate to respect their decided pace back to source. This course is presented in video format for free to overcome book shadow banning and make its existence known. Now that you know it exists, it's recommended to proceed how this course is intended to be absorbed by book. The title of the book is The Cosmic Experience of One, an Awareness Expanding Course for Human Beings. The information in this course is more effective and appropriate to be read in book form, where one can pause and ruminate and meditate on the material as they read. Besides the low audio quality in the videos and the protection from targeted spoken words and censorship, the book is a much better way to understand and learn the material. The book contains two more subjects, 104.2 and 104.3, which is my way of thanking those who show their appreciation to my aiding services by purchasing the book. Since we currently live in a broken monetary system, without your show of monetary appreciation for my services, I can't get by and continue to perform service to others acts by writing more meaningful books. Purchasing the book not only shows your appreciation for my services and allows me to live in this monetary system, but the course's material will be easily accessible for your revisiting. To more fully absorb the material, it's recommended to read the book at least twice. You will understand why on your second reading. You can gain positive polarity by doing your part in sharing this awareness expanding course with others. Raising the collective's vibration is a team effort. We cannot do this alone. Your participation is required. Liking and subscribing are also actions that make this course seen by more human beings. A negatively oriented being learns information and keeps it to themselves so they can selfishly benefit over others. A positively oriented being learns information and wants others to benefit from it as well because they care, and they know that aiding others also aids themselves. This is true in more ways than one. As a being gains positive polarity for aiding others, and they benefit again when another's vibration is raised because it raises the whole collective's vibration, which assists all, including the first being who shared. All are connected, all are one. Comments and questions will be read, but I will not reply with comments, nor like comments, nor heart comments, nor interact in the comments section in any way. If comments or questions are found to warrant a reply, the reply will be made in a possible future video. If an account using the same or similar profile picture, channel name, or my author name interacts in any of the ways listed above or other ways, know that it's not me and is a human tool working for the negatively oriented human beings to capture and twist the information in this course or your perception, or smear the messenger. Likewise, human tools may create fake accounts on this platform or others in the same attempt to capture and twist this course's information. Official sources for me are listed in the description field below. Everything else is fake.